Okay, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. My name is David Mills, and I'm starting this CGA webinar. I'm lucky enough to be in sunny Cape Town, but I'm bringing together Maria Azevedo at the State University of Maringa, Tristan McCowan from the Institute of Education, and Lee Rensemer, also from the Institute of Education in London. And their topic today, which is a joint presentation, is Brazil's transition to donor partner in higher education and science, a distinctive South-South cooperation rationale. I think it's a really interesting and important topic, and I know you've got some great material to share with us. So with no further ado, just do as normal, keep your video and cameras off, and we will ask you to turn on and ask questions using the question and answer function during the talk. So all yours, Lee, Tristan, Mario, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, David. It's great to be here and to see the CG webinar series going strong. This is actually a piece of research that came out of the CG Centre, part of the mapping the supranational higher education space strand, which also involved Maya Chankseliani, David Mills himself, and Rachel Brooks. And this was a spin-off piece of work in which we started a collaboration with Mario, and it's fantastic that we've been able to do this work together. And great to have Mario with us today. And it came out of the project focusing specifically on aid flows to higher education, looking at the changing nature of geopolitics, of flows of what is we recognize very problematically known as aid, and goes by a range of different terms in terms of cooperation, partnerships, and so forth, but involves flows of resources and technical support to higher education systems, usually from wealthier to less wealthy countries in the world. What we wanted to do in this project is to unpack some of the important changes that are taking place from the post-Second World War compact, the development compact, and particularly to think about the impacts that they have for higher education systems, both in terms of their resourcing and the nature of the knowledge production, teaching and learning process. Lee, if you could advance one. So, drawing on here ideas of Amitav Acharya and the notion of a multiplex world, that we're for the three reasons that he puts forward, we're moving towards a different geopolitical setup, generally speaking, both in terms of the rise of new nation-state actors, most obviously China, but others as well in different regions of the world. Also, the important regional blocs, again, most obviously the European Union, but others included as well, and what he called transnational alliances. And if we're applying this to the field of international development and aid, we have got some important new donors, oil-rich countries, for example, East Asia, the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, one of which we'll be looking at today. As well as other kinds of actors that are joining in the scenario, particularly the large US foundations, philanthropic foundations, which are have established them usually on the basis of large corporations, MasterCard Foundation being the most important one in higher education, but many others have been active historically and currently as well. We've also got changing modalities of aid. So that's the processes through which it's delivered, it's transferred and delivered and operationalized, some of which have been challenging some of the conventional ways in which the donors from high-income countries in the West have conducted their aid, usually through a series of conditionalities on the delivery of the aid, a transparent process which is reported via the OECD's creditor reporting system. And a number of the new actors are doing their aid in different ways, and with often blurred lines between the trading relationships and the international cooperation relationships. There's also been a move to what has been called retro-liberalism, of the traditional donors having a more explicit self-interest. If we think that aid usually has had historically a hybrid motivation of ensuring some degree of global justice, but also shoring up the interests of the donor country. I think is no exception there. In the field of higher education. So we also have a set of changing rationales for aid. And if you could advance, Lee, this leads us to the question that we want to pose today, which is whether this new scenario is leading us to a new configuration, which might be more horizontal, it might be less asymmetric, more globally just, or whether this is in fact a new form of hegemony, whether the new actors, the new modalities and rationales are really a different version of old hegemonies with different power relations and different actors, but nevertheless aid as an exercise of unequal and oppressive power. So that's the question we want to pose today. And we're taking a particularly interesting case, which is Brazil, which we will elaborate on more in due course. If you could advance the slide, please, Lee. So I said something about the broader research project that this came from. This paper is part of workstream 2. So the first workstream was to take a broader look at international flows. And if you're interested in this, have a look at the CG working paper that we published from it, which is listed lower on this slide, where we analyze some of the big picture data, and particularly the limitations of the CRS system, the OECD's system. But we also did some work with Rebecca Schendel and Tessa Delekil from Boston College, looking at some of the major donors and their rationales, which provides an important starting point. And we're seeing in all of those a shift of language from aid to partnership, but also a doubling down. This is the retro-liberal turn, a doubling down on self-interest as well, which is manifesting through higher education. Next one, please. To look at, and you can bring up all of the side bits, thanks. This was a summary study that was conducted by IASALC UNESCO a couple of years ago, which gives some very accessible summaries of the CRS data. And you can see there the orange part of the columns on the right. So those are the different years. And you can see that the lowest chunk is aid that goes to tertiary education specifically as a proportion of the total international aid to education, including primary, upper secondary and others. And you can see that it's a consistent proportion. It's just over a third. And it's characterized by perhaps some rather unusual characteristics, that actually the majority goes to middle income countries, divided between lower and upper middle income countries. So, and a much smaller proportion goes to the lowest income countries. But perhaps the most striking characteristic, if we look across the global terrain, is the very high proportion of these funds that are going to scholarships. So the nature of these flows are very different from basic education, where largely the funds are going into the recipient country. A large proportion of the scholarship funding is actually returning to the donor country. So let's take the example of, if you can move to the next slide, please, Lee. The largest donors to higher education you can see here are Germany and France, and over 90% of each huge funds are actually going to scholarships. So these are funds that actually return to the donor country as the students are supported there. Although, of course, if we're looking in terms of human capital circulation, the trajectory might be rather different. But this is a potentially a problematic aspect of these flows. You can also see some of the other some of the newer actors there on this list in terms of the total amounts. Turkey, Korea, Poland, Saudi Arabia, a MasterCard Foundation there. The blue colouring for multilateral, green for foundations. Don't pay too much attention to the 0% scholarship funding there for the USA. That's really an anomaly of accounting. USAID does provide, I mean, the USA does also provide a large amount of scholarship funding, but it's accounted for in slightly different ways. So that's something of a global backdrop there. So I'll finish by saying something about the country of Brazil and its higher education system before we move on to looking specifically at some of the flows inwards and outwards in Brazil. And what's of particular interest to us in this presentation is the transition state. So when we're looking at this multiplex world, you've got national actors that are moving from being recipients of these flows from the northern donors to being themselves donor countries and having their own relationships of aid flows with others. But it's important to say something about the higher education system in Brazil before looking specifically at those, because it influences many of the modalities through which higher education support is given. And the Brazilian higher education is a very complex one. It's a very diversified system, quite a polarized one. If we're looking at a global scenario in which we can see increasing hybridization of public and private in higher education, in many ways, the Brazilian system is still very separate, given that there is a public system that is completely free of charge for students and has large amounts of state support, even though they do have some small private sources of funding through enterprise and so forth. And a very large private sector that has little public support. It does have some financial flows through various access programs, but dominated by commercialized for-profit institutions. There are also some non-profit religious institutions in the sector, but of that, you can see 79.3% of enrollments in the private sector, very high, and dominated by for-profit providers. And as you can see there, also a very large amount in distance education. In the public sector, particularly the federal and state institutions, it's much smaller, but you have some very high quality and very research productive institutions, particularly in the federal system, and some of the state institutions, which are very research intensive, the most famous of them being the University of Sao Paulo and Campinas. So you have a system that's characterized both by very high quality and research intensivity, but also the vast majority of enrollments in institutions that are commercially oriented without research. So that's something of the backdrop. And just to introduce some of the agencies that will also be important characters in the story that we'll tell, other than the Ministry of Education, of course, CAPES and CNPq are important agencies in Brazil that are also engaged in some of this international work. CAPES focusing to a large extent on the professional development of the academic community, providing support for ongoing development, but also quality assurance, particularly of graduate programs and research. And CNPq, which is the major federal research funder for Brazil. There are also state-level research funding agencies. Some of them are important, particularly in the wealthier southeastern states, but CNPq is the national funder, which is by far the most important. And all of these agencies, as well as some of the specifically international cooperation ones at the federal level, have an important role to play in these international exchange programs. So after that introduction, I'll hand over now to Lee, who will take us through some of the the data around international flows.
Okay, thank you, Tristan. So I'd like to just be the bridge between Tristan's overview here of some of the major issues surrounding development cooperation, or aid, if we call it that, to higher education, and then but by narrowing down into the Brazil case, still looking at the situation maybe financially, numerically, before then handing over to Mario, who can give a much more richer, deeper historical look at all the various programming that Brazil is involved in the higher education space. So I should caveat by going any further that that the data that we draw on to produce these snapshots are problematic in various ways, and we've talked about this in our earlier working paper quite extensively. But they can be problematic in terms of its the consistency of data. So each country will report their data in different ways, and sometimes using different methodologies year on year, and also the availability of data with some countries, as we know, or I shouldn't say countries, but just some donor actors not even participating in the reporting process entirely. And so that goes for the major, more frequently used sources of data, such as the OECD CRS, which tends to report the DAC, the Development Assistance Committee of traditional donors, plus a few others, and the multilaterals. But it tends not to reflect, of course, the newer donor actors, the non-DAC countries, as well as private foundations. So they tend to be missing from the picture. And so that certainly speaks to our case when we're looking at Brazil and its transition from a recipient of aid to a donor of aid, because finding the flows that are going into Brazil is much easier than talking about and accurately reporting the funds that are coming out of Brazil. It's not to say that the data don't exist. It's just that it's a lot more scattered, and it's reported in slightly different ways year on year. And so the challenge for us has been to kind of cobble that all together in a way that makes sense. So just with that caveat, looking at the numbers here and in the next couple of slides, we just need to take them with maybe a grain of salt. But I have two tables here, and the first one on the left would be the total volume of ODA that's going to Brazil that went in the most recent year, in 2022. And I think what's telling about this, I don't have a longitudinal picture here, but over decades, there's a tapering off of ODA to Brazil, and it's now down to only $1 billion. It's tapered down, and it's also changed in terms of its substance, in terms of what it's comprised of. I think tellingly, you can see the largest donors here in the table, but it's a combination of bilateral and multilateral partners, many of which represent renewable sources and climate-related funds and facilities. So the largest piece of the pie here is various social infrastructures, a bit of governance. The second one being renewable energy development. And I think most tellingly is right behind that, in third place, is higher education. So it is a sizable piece. So I can kind of show you then, if you move over to the right-hand side here, this is the money that's going to higher education. It's an overall 7 to 8% of the total amount of ODA to Brazil, but it is categorically the third largest. And I think even tellingly, it's 10 times larger than aid going to primary and secondary combined in Brazil. So it's a large part of the picture. And this also tells a lot of the story that Tristan already mentioned about major donors to the higher education space, but in a way that the money is self-serving. As you can see, the proportion of scholarship in the final right column is nearly 100% in almost all cases. So most of this money, 98.9% of the money that goes to higher education aid to Brazil is scholarships. And so that explains why you see particular donor partners here, as well as a few maybe less usual ones, like Israel and Qatar. So to tell the other side of the story, we are also drawing on Brazilian government data, which is reported through the IPEA. They publish reports and data sets, and they do so in slightly different ways each year. But it has allowed us to look at sort of the outflows of Brazil's development cooperation. And so in the upper right, we have a chart here that shows the total volume of ODAs that they've contributed since 2005. And you can see some pretty major fluctuations there, but it does tend to fluctuate between 200 million to, well, over $1 billion now. And so that the overall, despite the shifts, there is a clear direction of some pretty serious growth of the overall ODA. In terms of how that's broken down, on the left, there's a pie chart here that shows that actually most of its commitments go to through multilateral channels. And so it's not strictly the traditional multilaterals of say, UNESCO and the ICC, which they do contribute to, but also some regional partners that like Mercosul that Brazil plays a large role in. And so multilateralism is a big piece of how it approaches development cooperation. But also in here, you can see the orange educational cooperation slice of the pie, which is 5 to 6%. But if you combine that with scientific and technological cooperation, that tells more of the higher education story, because a big piece of that is research related. And so that goes to the various programs that Mario will talk about. So collectively, it's about 20% or so of its money that is invested in internationalization related aid. And we kind of have a bar chart down at the bottom right that also shows some of these. And this is sort of where the patchiness of the data is showing, with the rise of scientific cooperation, which actually it wasn't reported separately until 2010, and when it was, it appears to have taken some of the funding away from the educational side and more of a lot of these programs are overlapping, so some of that is reported differently from 2010 onward. I'll just end quickly by saying that also we can kind of get a sense of well, which partners that Brazil is most invested in its relationships. Many of them being Lusophone countries and South American, Latin American neighbors, but also very much partnerships across the global South. So we can see here Africa being nearly a quarter of its partners, with many others being in Latin America, Central America, Caribbean, and so on. We also have a third source of data that's very patchy, but telling sort of little interesting snippets of information, and that comes from aiddata.org, which is a major player in aid research that reports on many of the underreported flows, coupling together various sources. And so they have a Brazil data set that is quite outdated, but it does have a few really neat pictures of major items of technical cooperation that show specific activities related to higher education. So we have like a nearly $20 million transaction that was related to the development of a university in Mozambique, training, partnership, and so on. And then several $100,000 transactions for similar projects in Cape Verde and in Peru. All in all, we have kind of a mosaic or a scattered picture of data, but it is pointing in certain directions, obviously, to the emergence of Brazil as a donor actor, and one that is concentrating particularly in its partnerships in higher education. So I guess with that, I'll hand over to Mario to elaborate and help us see the story in a more qualitative way. Mario, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Lee. Thank you, Tristan, too. Your speech facilitates for me now. With this number, I would like first to say that Brazil was a recipient country, and there is some project and program was very important for us. We have a turn point in Lula government, but we have to remember that as a recipient, Brazil has received funding from, for example, Ford Foundation. And it was important this moment because we need to send some scholars, some researchers to the foreign countries. And the CAPES, the federal agency that Tristan had said, receive funds from Ford Foundation. They could send some scholar to North countries. And in the time of authoritarian government in Brazil, the dictatorship in Brazil, Ford Foundation, for example, funds SEBRAP, and SEBRAP is important, very important think tank in Brazil. And in this time, SEBRAP, in SEBRAP was Fernando Henrique Cardoso, the future president of Brazil, André Singer, very important economist, and Arthur Gianotti, a philosopher who are there in SEBRAP. And more recently, for the foundation, funds for Afro-Brazilian education, and we received funds from UNESCO, UNICEF, European Union, the Tuning Alpha project, and USAID. I would like to remark this because USAID, it's not so interesting for us because this recipient fund was for higher education reform in the time of the dictatorship in Brazil. So when we remember this, we think about a time that was not so good or not so easy for us. The dictatorship in Brazil started in 1964, and it had a duration for 21 years. So only in 1985, we regained our democracy. So sometimes, like Albert Hirschman says in the past, the good can be bad when we think this kind of funding, for example. But I would like to remark this. So like I said before, the turn point was after Lula government. Just a number here. ABC is our Brazilian cooperation agency. In 2004, this ABC agency, we only done or gave 0.24 million or $240,000. And when we arrived in 2010, the Brazilian given or done or partnership, if you prefer, is more than $21 million. So this is the turning point. Please, Lee. So where or whom is or our partnership is more in South-South cooperation. Tristan said before, CNPq, CAPS, and CONFAP are very important, more CNPq and CAPS, in our relationship in higher education with South-South cooperation. And our diplomacy and our academy, the research in this area of studies, try to highlight the Bandung principles like equality, solidarity, and mutual development and complementarity. We always, the Brazilian agency, Brazilian government, and the Brazilian scholars try to highlight it's not a unbalanced power, but we try to have an horizontal partnership. And without, it's important, without the conditionalities, because as Muaz and Young said, conditionalities undermine sovereignty and the principles of mutual respect. Sometimes we try to remember the values about cooperation, but without to intervene in sovereignty of other countries. In this course is that, but we know that it's not so easy not to interfere, but there is this discourse, and always we find in the documents and agreements that all agreements have to respect some values in the South-South cooperation. So Muga and Hammond remember that the current Brazilian model reflects a genuine commitment to the early ethos and the spirit of South-South development cooperation. Please, Lee. So what programs Brazilian has with other countries in higher education cooperation? Firstly, it's very, very important for us is the Brazilian Undergraduate Scholarship Program. For us, we prefer to say just PEC-G or PEC-G. Second, Brazilian Postgraduate Scholarship Program is for after undergraduate, sure. Third, UNILA is in the time of Lula government, is first for Latin American integration. UNILAB is a university for international integration of the Afro-Brazilian Lusophony. And in 2022, Brazil published a call with a program with the name Emergency Academic Solidarity Program. It's for scholars, refugee scholars to come to Brazil. I will say some words after. In this, we have a special case. We will say that the PALOP and the CPLP are our great partners in higher education cooperation, and Mercosul, and finally BRICS countries. Yeah, please, Lee. So firstly, PEC-G, and I said that is very important for us, for Brazil. In 2011, PEC-G had 1,215 students. In 2012, 1,564 students. And the last number 1,826 students in 2013. PEC-G normally, regularly, receive more African students from Lusophony countries like Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, and others. So PEC-G is more for African students. And PEC-PG, the next please, Lee. And PEC-PG is it's interesting because more than 70% of PEC-G is for African students from African countries. PEC-PG is more the students is more from Latin American countries. Why? The explanation, maybe the justificative, maybe is because there is a historical and consolidated universities in Latin America, like Cordoba University, National University of San Marcos in Peru, or Colombia, and the other countries. So we receive more postgraduate students from Latin American countries. And remember what Tristan said, the public universities in Brazil are free of charge. And from PEC-G, the students could or can receive amount like $300. And for PEC-PG, burst scholarship next to more than 2,000 reals. So when we convert, it's not so much, but we have normally a scholarship for postgraduate student in Brazil, more for Latin American. Please. And the UNILA, we said about UNILA, and the UNILA was created in 2010, and it was a part of this public effort for South-South cooperation, and is direct more for Latin American countries. And UNILA is located in Foz do Iguaçu, and is in the border of Paraguay and Argentina. And the campus is inside, or is part, or was granted by Itaipu Binacional, or Itaipu Binational, is a big hydroelectrical using, and this dam, or this hydroelectrical space, is shared by Brazil and Paraguay. So just remark this from Marco Antônio Dias. Marco Antônio Dias said that a university like UNILA is located on the border, seeking to create knowledge for Latin America without borders. Oh, this is fantastic. And UNILA, in this moment, in 2023, had 4,241 students, and some indigenous students too, 165, refugee students 83, the students from public school with reserve is 692 students, and for Black people and indigenous people, we have a reserve for 202 students. And for disability students, UNILA in 2023 had 27 students. Please. UNILAB UNILAB is, like we said, is a university for international integration for Afro-Brazilian Lusophony, and is in the northwest of Brazil, in the state of Ceará. The city, the name is Redenção, and UNILAB has campus in other cities like Acharya and São Francisco do Conde. And UNILAB, it's a curiosity if you could construct a ranking, and we take this figure from UNILAB, is the university who have more foreign students in Brazil, 1,393 students. Second is UNILA with 1,389. Third is Santa Catarina and others. Just to say that we could interpret that UNILAB and UNILA is meeting the aims of internationalization or solidarity with Afro countries, students from Africa and Latin American too. Yeah, yes, please, Lee. And the program, Emergency Academic Solidarity Program, is for refugee scholars. And this is more recently published call. And in this year, there are the results, and each program is 24 programs, Brazilian postgraduate programs, will call these refugee scholars to come to Brazil. And I think CAPES, this is the funding for this PESA, Emergency Academic Solidarity Program, is to balance or evaluate if will meet you meet the aims to these goals, because we just in Brazil end this not end but just publish the results of this call. Please, Lee. So for the program for PALOP and CPLP partnership, a true soft cooperation, and we take Cape Verde as an example, because with Cape Verde we have a historical and a cultural relationship. It's not so big country, but when you think about Amilcar Cabral, for example, was a great leader in African decolonization and the anti-colonial movements. And in the same countries, Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, Paulo Freire was there between 1977 and 1979. So what kind of things we are doing there or in partnership with Cape Verde? Brazilian support, for example, creation of census institutes, a school feeding program, pastoral da criança, or pastoral of care or children care, management of cultural heritage, agricultural and environment science, personal training, creation of a data center, renewable energy, health, technology transfer, partner universities, UFMG, for example, in Brazil. And this number we mentioned is 2,572 higher education students between 2001 and 2011. And we have a partnership with, when we say we, it's Brazil, The Brazilian contribution is not so consolidated because UNCV prefer to be more compatible with Bologna model. So Brazil has a partnership with UNCV, but we know that it's not completed. Please, Lee. So with Mercosul, and Mercosul, there is some Mercosul student mobility with researchers, Brazilian and Argentinian, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuelan scholars and students. There is some number here. It's not so many students and so many scholars or researchers, but we have some experience in mobility in Mercosul. And educational Mercosul has the objectives to, firstly, search some standardization and mutual recognition. Second, language and cultural exchange. Third, skills development and innovation. Fourth, social inclusion and equity. Fifth, teacher training and professional development. Sixth, research and knowledge sharing. This is the goals of Mercosul, educational Mercosul. Yeah, please, Lee. And the last is about BRICS. There is two main cooperation in higher education in BRICS. BRICS, you know, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And there is a BRICS network university, was created in 2015, and BRICS League University was funded in the same year. So there is some call in Brazil to enter in this league and network, but we have to admit that it's not so big until now. And it's more an experience. It started with like 9 universities in Brazil and the university of other 4 countries. And now is more. BRICS is having new partners. Please, yeah. And for conclusion, very fast, because we need to discuss something, is firstly, there is a prominence of solidarity as a rationale within cooperation program in higher education internationalization. This is reflected in its distinctive focus on cultural exchange rather than income generation. Yet a multidimensional approach balances solidarity, mutual development, and academic diplomacy. And Brazilian diplomacy, the academic as well, avoids the OECD DAC terminology. They avoid words like donor, aid, conditionalities, try to remember the other values about solidarity and the mutual respect. Yeah. Brazil, as donor, focuses on South-South cooperation, mostly with Latin America and the African countries, and summit diplomacy with Portuguese-speaking countries, CPLP, BRICS, China, BRICS, yeah, you know, the countries, and the Mercosul. Higher education being one of the main sectors of cooperation. Modalities. While development cooperation today is characterized by diverse channels involving NGOs, private companies, and other institutions, Brazil remains very much state to state. It's true. And the last one, conclusion, is there is some kind of a blurring of trade and cooperation. We didn't mention directly this, but there is, Brazil have not several multinationals, but there is some interest, it's true, in extractive industry and the construction. So We don't know the future, but I hope no. I hope no that it's possible in for-profit education sector in the future. But yeah, so thanks. Thank you very much. We are open to discuss with you.
Great, Mario, thank you very much. That was a really useful set of sort of slides, and your conclusion slide opens up lots of questions. And I was about to start with a question, but Alejandra has phrased it really well, which is about language. So let's go straight to Alejandra, and you're allowed to have 2 questions. Of course you can. Can you unmute Alejandra? Shall I unmute you? There we go. Sorry, my fault.
Oh, hi, thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for the presentation. So I had 2 questions, and I think that you might be able to see me. Scary. Hi. Hi, Mario, Tristan, Lee, thank you so much for your presentation. I have been studying regional higher education for 20 years now in Brazil and Latin America, and what strikes me in your presentation, which I really, really enjoy, you took so many notes, is about this mix in the Brazilian vocabulary between what is aid, what we understand as aid, and what can be understood as cooperation. Cooperation having this more strategic feature. How did you incorporate that in your research? And if you didn't problematize, was that an issue at all? How did you address this? And if it did not matter, does that mean that you considered all internationalization, broadly activities as cooperation? I have an issue with the terminology, I think. So I wondered if you could please elaborate on that. And my second question is, there is one of the slides, I think that it was first or second slide that Mario presented. You discussed about the overall understanding, the Brazilian cooperation in higher education is about solidarity. But there's one quote that lists solidarity and soft power, which in my head creates a huge knot. Because one of them, solidarity is, of course, a very important aspect, but the element of soft power was not discussed. I was wondering if you could please address that as well. Thank you.
Great questions, Alejandra. It's over to you, Mario, and Lee and Tristan.
Perhaps I could just say a quick word, and Lee and Mario might like have some other things. But yeah, thanks very much, Alejandra. A great question. I mean, I think there are just first. Just a quick note in terms of because I think your question was highlighting, in terms of our methodology, how we distinguish between things. And I think, there's a sort of very simple, well, perhaps deceptively so, but I think, what is classified as aid is when a government spends money on other people's citizens. Rather, it's not about providing opportunities for your own. It's actually using resources to support, in this particular case, either studying in higher education or the funding of research or other kinds of activities at universities that are outside the national space. But I mean, I think there's another aspect of your question which is really interesting, relating to Brazil, about the way things are framed. A bit of it is just the language element. I mean, if aid is a term that's used in the English language. It's not used very much in most of the Romance languages. I mean, it's the same in Spanish-speaking countries as well, Portuguese and others. I mean, cooperation is a preferred term, even for talking about the same thing, actually. But there's something a bit more than that, which is, I think Brazil has deliberately, used certain kinds of language. I think partly in a strategic way, and this links in with the soft power one, which I think Lee might be able to. Mario might be able to talk more to. It's partly strategic because I think historically Brazil has been very skillful in achieving its national ambitions through diplomacy.
Yeah,
and it's partly
absolutely
a way of framing national interest, but also a genuine commitment to certain values in the global sphere around sovereignty and horizontal relations. So I think maybe a combination of those things, perhaps. I don't know, Lee and Mario, would you like to come in on that at all?
Can I start, Lee? First, it's a pleasure to hear the NDC. Alejandra, thank you for your question. Thank you very much. Yeah, you are right. There is some kind of terminology it's not so compatible, but we have to mention. Because of all part or several papers we see soft power, and we know that soft power was created by Joseph Nye Jr. is a very important international relation researcher. And when we think about reputation, or when we think about a field of power, or a power field, like Pierre Bourdieu said, there is a struggle in the field. So what kind of object, what kind of thing we are searching or fight for? So there is some reputation, some prestige in this. We mentioned soft power there, just to remember there is other terminology, but yes, it's like a respect from the others or reputation or thing like that. But what is more important for us, for Brazil and the university, all universities, we have to respect the others. We have to think about solidarity, and it's not explicitly, and it's not kind to call a thing like soft power when we think in soft cooperation. Just to say that you are right in this remark, and once I heard and read to a paper from Marginson, and we tried to think about it. Xianxia, it's like a Chinese word, but I will call another thinker. It's Ernest Bloch, and Ernest Bloch said we could construct a utopia, and he called this concrete utopia. And Thompson said it's not a concrete in the sense of material, but is the sense of concrescere, a Latin word to say we have to build our relationship together in respect of others. So I think the goal and the aims of Brazilian diplomacy or Brazilian cooperation, soft cooperation, like Bandung and the Brandt report, is more in this sense. And last, well, yeah, I think I answered the 2 points in a way. Sorry if not. Thank you.
Mario, that's great, and I think you're right. I think it's fascinating to think about the connections between the way in which the Chinese talk about people to people, and that you've got a similar sort of discourse going on here of relationship building that's both at once a form of diplomacy and a form of soft power. We're getting to the end of the hour, so we have a couple more questions from Jan and from Yusuf. Perhaps we should take both of them together, and then if you can have any final responses. So Jan, perhaps Yusuf first, please.
Yeah, I'll be very quick because I think mine is related to the discussion you've just had in response to Alejandra. Thank you very much for the contributions. I was really interested in the figures, particularly the ones that Mario was presenting, which related to international cooperation in the field of higher education, the South-South cooperation. It feels like there is very much two strands of South-South cooperation. There is the South-South cooperation within the region of Latin America, which seems to be benefiting a lot Brazil in terms of building capacity, and there is the South-South cooperation in direction of African Lusophone countries, which on the face of it, but I wanted your confirmation of that, sounds very much to me following very similar patterns to the South-South cooperation that we see between traditional donors of Europe and African countries when it comes to higher education, very much more focused on teaching, on lower levels of education, less on building research capacity, etc. So I just wanted you to react to this and confirm whether I got it wrong or right here, that the noble project of the horizontal cooperation is actually having different trends here. Thank you.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Jan. The different types of cooperation. And Yusuf, sorry, you please do come in. Your last question. Are you muted?
How about now? How about now?
Perfect. Well done.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So yeah, I'll be quick. I know the time is up. So thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I really enjoyed. I used actually one of your reports in one of my classes, and the students were really interested. So here's my question. I'll be quick. My question is about your earlier framework. I was happy to see you're using this, the multiplex world order framework, right? I also happen to have an upcoming paper that uses this framework. My observation has been that the scholars in our field have leaned towards using multipolarity as a framework compared to multiplexity, right? These are like the different ways to look at similar situation. So just, wanted to ask, can we say that research in our field may take up the multiplexity argument more in the coming years compared to multipolarity? Maybe it's too ambiguous to some who do not work on it. Maybe we can discuss it later as well. Yes, thank you for the time. Let me not take more of the time. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Yusuf, and thanks both for good questions. So 2 minutes, please. Mario, Lee, Tristan. Who's going first?
2 minutes each or 2 minutes together?
No, ideally for everyone, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, just a very quick comment from me. Yeah, so I think multiplex probably gives more malleability than multipolarity, which just indicates different poles. I think there are sort of different dimensions of multiplex that aren't just new actors. So, yeah, and in answer to Jan's question, yeah, I think it's a good point. I think probably the answer is that some of it looks pretty much the same, but there are some different things. And I think for me, the UNILA and UNILAB examples are really interesting because they genuinely represent a different form, both of internationalization at home, but also of international cooperation. Because you're looking at an exchange, that is supporting people to go to university from other lower income countries, but also a very strong cultural and research exchange within those institutions and linking with other initiatives. So I think those are quite a different kind of and very, very distinctive initiative. Those two.
Yeah, brilliant. That's really interesting. Mario, any last word, or Lee?
Yes. Can I, Lee?
Please.
I think the second that Tristan answered is very well answered. Thank you, Tristan. And firstly, for Jan, one clause or one conditionality that has in PEC-G cooperation, for example, is all students must return home, not in the sense that it's not your home in Brazil, but in the sense that Brazil tried to avoid diaspora or avoid brain drain. So for me, I think it's very different because it's not an acta-driven of a brain, but a partner that you could, in a sense of international relationship, to take something and to return with what they learned, in the sense not in a patronized way, but in the sense more in a sense of more mutual respect, and could have a relationship without direct interest. But I know that it's not always like that, but we have this conditionality in PEC-G and PEC-PG. It's not a way to brain drain or cause a diaspora of African and Latin American students. Thank you. And thank you for your question.
Yeah, no, really interesting, and I think UNILAB is a great case to understand more about. So thank you very much for telling us about that. I think we should wrap up, unless Lee, you have any last words?
No. I was just going to very quickly say that I've only been looking at the government reporting side of things, but in that they are very explicit about this need to demystify Brazilian aid. And it's quite interesting how they foreground that in all their methodology about seeing beyond numbers, and they stress that more than financial numbers or just transfers of money, it's these relationships, state to state, person to person, that is what truly represents the Brazilian aid model. So they're quite vocal about how they articulate aid in a very trying to present something that is different to dominant traditional models of aid. Yeah.
Well, we need more governments to criticize the numbers and the rankings games. That's brilliant. Thank you all very much. It's been a really interesting conversation, and thank you everyone for joining us today as normal. This is being recorded. We'll put it up tomorrow on our website. We have the last webinar of the year next week, which is on internationalization in a different context. It's in the context of post-Brexit, post-COVID Europe. And Lose from Technical University of Berlin will be joining us next Tuesday at 2 p.m. UK time. Thanks again to everyone. Thank you very much, Mario Azevedo, for joining us from Brazil, and Lee, Christian. See you again soon. Bye-bye.